Next up is Jay Lehr.
Thank you, Sterling. I'm not sure I've ever missed a day's work being ill. This might be the first. Up until last week, I billed myself as the healthiest 85-year-old on the planet. Had never really seriously been in a doctor's office until the COVID virus struck me hard. But I'm surviving well, and I'm so excited that Heartland's allowed me to make my presentation live, but remotely by Zoom. And I am going to take a very different approach. And Sterling alluded to the fact that I more or less tend to paddle upstream on many issues, and this is certainly one of them. I'm going to present my case as though I was a lawyer and you were my jury, and I am going to try to convince you, the jury, that my position on man-caused climate change is quite different than the average, very strong, but very accurate. And as a lawyer often does in a case, he or she stipulates certain facts before the jury. And knowing Willy Soon and Greg Wright Stone as well as I do, I will stipulate that they are absolutely brilliant. And I don't question the fact that they're smarter than me. And yet I believe they're not going in a direction that would benefit society as much as it could. Willy is a joy to work with. I have a radio show now on America Out Loud every weekend, and Willy is my guest this weekend. And interviewing him as to the work he is currently doing, 32 years into his work in climate science, he's like a kid with a new toy. And it is so refreshing. And one of the things that he has done recently is recruited 23 scientists from around the world who recognize that the ICCP reports do not hold water. And they have collectively put together a paper pointing it out from many different directions. They don't even all agree with each other. But they were willing to, in a sense, drop everything they were doing to write an amazing paper to put the lie to everything the ICCP has been doing in recent years. And in my interview with him, it was a delight to see the joy 32 years later that he has in doing this work, and considering the fact that Willy is undoubtedly the most maligned climate scientist in the world. He's been attacked from every direction and has managed to keep his spirits up and keep his work up. And it's really been very exciting. Greg Wright Stone is similarly brilliant. His book, Inconvenient Facts, I'd have to say is the most useful book on climate change. If you haven't read it, maybe it's available here at this conference. And what's beautiful about Inconvenience Facts is it lays out all the factual information that the public needs to understand and can share easily with their friends and neighbors and colleagues without getting heavily into the weeds. And I think his presentation just passed shows that he's able to deal with topics without getting too complex. And in that book, it's an easy read, and it's just one fact after another. But I believe that both Willy and Greg haven't quite gone far enough in working on behalf of uncovering the tremendous human-caused global climate change fraud as a result of man's entirely effort of burning fossil fuels and creating carbon dioxide. And I'm going to base my argument on 3 slides that I created actually some years ago that are very easy to understand and should undermine everybody who's trying to say that a little extra carbon dioxide in the atmosphere that we provide is going to end life as we know it. The first slide, actually, Willy and I worked on together a few years ago with Tom Weissmuller, formerly of NASA. Tom passed away a year ago. I went to Willy and I said, I am quite confident that none of the general circulation models that the enemy, and I will call them the enemy, because their goal isn't to prove what they know scientifically. Their goal is to eliminate inexpensive, easily available fossil fuels and gain control of the lives of everybody on the planet. So I went to Willy and Tom Weissmuller and I said, I'd like a list of a dozen variables that we really don't fully understand, but plain logic would tell you that we need these variables. They need to be in our climate models. We need to understand them if we feel that any kind of a projection of climate based on a circulation model could possibly be correct. I won't read them to you. They're right there in front of them. I'll read a few of them. But the object of these 12 climate variables is that plain logic would tell you, how can you make a climate model and not use these variables? I mean, you must be able to understand seasonal solar irradiation. You would have to know the energy flows between the ocean and the atmosphere and between air and land, and the role of Earth's water vapor and ice. My most interesting one is the impact of clouds. Certainly no one would argue that we have to understand clouds in order to project what the Earth's thermostat would be. And I test this on about everybody that I deal with. And I say, well, do you think we understand the impact of clouds? And everybody assumes we do, but it's absolutely not true. There are many mysteries in it. We don't understand the role of the planet's ice sheets, and on down the list. It's very surprising that these variables are not known and do not show up in the enemy's climate models. Do you believe that we don't understand the impact of vegetation on temperature? We surely don't understand the tectonic movement on the ocean floor. We don't at all understand the fact that we have a differential rotation between the Earth's surface and the planet's core. All right, Willy soon, some years ago, wrote an article in which he said that if we knew all the variables that control the planet's climate and we used the world's largest supercomputer, it would take 40,000 years to generate a single answer. The variables are so many, they're so complex, and to go through the number of iterations you'd have to do, it's actually hopeless. I am totally convinced that all the climate models the enemy foists on us to say our emission of carbon dioxide is going to destroy the world as we know it is absolutely absurd. And I think that if you study this list of 12 and you realize none of this appears in their models are a joke. Now, I went beyond that and I created 2 diagrams which work even better to the logic of the average individual. I call them my 10,000 dot diagrams. And the one before you now is a chart of water vapor as the predominant greenhouse gas, man-made carbon dioxide, and negligible impact of the Earth's temperature. There are 10,000 dots on the diagram. The green dots are all water vapor, which, as we all know, is the primary greenhouse gas. The yellow dots are nitrous oxide, methane, and a few other things. The gray dots are carbon dioxide, and yet it's only the bottom 9 or so dots which are man-made carbon dioxide. So logic would tell any individual, if what the enemy is telling us is that this tiny amount of man-made carbon dioxide, which is not up for debate, is ruining life as we know it. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous. I've been using this diagram for many, many years, and I've yet to find anybody that isn't amazed that this is true. We produce so little man-made carbon dioxide. How could it possibly be controlling the temperature of the Earth? My next 10,000 point chart deals with all of the gases in the atmosphere. 78%, as you all know, is nitrogen. 21% is oxygen. Argon is a little less than 1%. And man-made carbon dioxide is a very tiny amount of the atmospheric gas in our atmosphere. How could it possibly be controlling the temperature of the planet? It simply could not. It simply could not. Now, the argument I have with Willy and Greg, who do amazing work with models and numbers and equations, and I stipulated they're smarter than I, but they're opening a door for the enemy on a regular basis by arguing, well, man's impact of carbon dioxide emissions is certainly not the entire cause of changes in the Earth's thermostat, but they are part of the problem. Well, everybody here knows the old saying, you give someone an inch and he takes a mile. So everybody that's been working to solve all of the variables that affect the Earth's temperature is giving the enemy an inch to take the proverbial mile. And my argument is that we simply do not make a strong enough case for the public that while we're loving doing research, we're loving to find answers to the impact of those 12 variables I listed on my first slide. This is great science. Willy just is a kid with a new toy trying to solve some of the problems. And Greg Wrightstone has the very same joy in working with these things. And yet I can't get them to focus more on the fact that our role in a negative way on the temperature of the planet is absolutely insignificant. So the case I'm trying to make here, and maybe everybody in the audience and everybody on the panel would accept the fact that I don't think we should write any articles whatsoever as esoteric, as complex, as accurate as they might be, without making it clear that we do not believe man has any measurable negative impact on the thermostat of the planet. And in the next slide, I want to show a cartoon I made on photosynthesis. The left has vilified carbon dioxide. As absurd as it is, everybody in this room knows we only live on this awesome planet because of carbon dioxide, photosynthesis, water, plant life, the plants support us and animals and so on. And this is the picture of all carbon dioxide in our atmosphere that should be the image that everybody in the world, everybody that considers this, that's what we should be thinking about with regard to the importance of carbon dioxide, instead of what the enemy tells us is life as we know it is going to end in 8 or 12 years, and that we must stop burning fossil fuels and we must use only wind and solar. And of course, they know that isn't possible. For them, it's not about science. It's about control. If they can take away from us the use of fossil fuels and push us to use wind and solar, which are hopelessly inadequate, basically the government will take over every atom of energy that we can use. And that's their goal. They know wind and solar can't support our economy. They want to be in charge of rationing energy to every one of us, and thereby controlling the lives of every one of us in this country and the whole world. It has nothing to do with science. Now, I want to conclude with one slide that I'd like to get everybody to agree on. I believe that we need to resolve that ultimately the only number that matters with regard to understanding man's impact on the Earth's thermostat is 0. Now, I've put a number here on the screen that has a 0 to the left of the decimal point. And I think there's absolutely nobody working and trying to calculate man's role in the thermostat of the Earth that believes our impact could be a whole number to the left of the decimal point. In fact, I don't know anybody that believes man's impact would be a whole number one place to the right of the decimal point. That would be a 10th, or the second 0 would be a 100th. Even onto the third 0, which would be a 1,000th, and the fourth a 10,000th. In other words, everybody I know, even the great Greg Wright, they believe man plays a role, but I believe the numbers that they lean toward, and that the awesome carbon dioxide group that he heads up, the Carbon Dioxide Coalition, is working with very small numbers. They are trying to prove some numerical certainty. I don't think they'll ever get there. I don't think they'll ever get there because I think the variables that I showed in my first slide can never be solved. Well, never's a long time. You know, it might be many, many decades, but certainly not near term. So the bottom line for me is to try to convince everybody here, and I think there are only few exceptions in the audience, who believe that man plays a major role in the temperature of the planet. A gentleman in an earlier panel called himself a warmer. I don't think we have too many warmers that have attended this conference. But I think that if everybody who's working in this area, who's writing papers, who's lecturing, who is happy to present clear scientific data as to how we determine models that give us an insight into understanding the temperature of the planet. And understand models were never developed to come up with economic answers. The whole idea of working with models is to understand the sensitivity of the various factors. And the factors are the dozen that I've listed. So what I'm asking all of you to do in your great work is somewhere in your papers, somewhere in your lectures, to share with your audiences the fact that as much as you're desiring and continuing to do good scientific work to better and better understand what controls the temperature of the planet, that the impact of everything we're doing, the impact of man, the default number is zero. We all know we work with computers. If we haven't programmed the computer to generate specific numbers, we generally have a default number. I am totally convinced that with regard to man's contribution to the thermostat of our planet, the default number of everything we're doing is zero. And I think that if we all made that clear, because I really think we all believe it, if we made that clear in our work, in our lectures, and our writings, we'd have a larger audience to understand it, and we would be less subject to having a hole in the fence, so to speak, that the left drives a truck through because they find a weakness in our arguments. I so appreciate Heartland letting me make this presentation live and on Zoom, and being able to listen to Willy and Greg, and I'm looking forward to Greg's presentation and any questions that'll come up later. Thank you all very, very much.